So, hey, welcome everybody. This is the Consequence of Habit virtual meeting. All are welcome here. So, the mission statement of Consequence of Habit nonprofit is to empower individuals and communities by bringing awareness to the impact habits have on our mental health, success, and the environment. When we do get to the discussion portion, we don't really have a lot of rules around here, but we do have a little bit. So just here are the guidelines. It says our habits and the solutions are as diverse as we are. We respect each other and refrain from giving unwarranted advice, interrupting each other, talking down from a sort of high ground, or directly commenting on another's share. This does not mean that we can't allow someone's share to resonate with us and remind us of our own experience. But to protect privacy, what you hear here, please let it stay here. And of course, you have to be nice. So be kind or be gone. This is a portion of me where we do introductions. We think it's beneficial to cultivate community by introducing ourselves. And there's no need to identify yourself by anything other than your name. But if you'd like to tell us perhaps where you're joining us from, that would be nice. And I might not have to tell anyone how to use mute, but I'm going, or mute, Zoom. In order to unmute, you can click the microphone icon on the computer app, and if anyone's calling in, it's *6. So I'll just go down the participants, list, and we'll go that way. So let's see if I can figure out how to do that. Well, how about this? How about we go with Joe? Would you like to introduce yourself?
Joe, upstate New York.
Thanks, Joe. Whoops, sorry. I'm messing this all up, folks. How about Jenna? Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hey, everybody. I'm Jenna. I'm in Pennsylvania, just outside of Philadelphia. Just back from vacation today, visiting Virginia. So happy to see everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah. How about Jeff Harris? Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hey, Jeff Harris. I'm from Colorado Springs. Great to meet everybody.
Awesome. Let's go with Karen Johnson. You're muted, Karen.
You know, it's funny. I'm an educator and I do this all the time. And at least once a day, I do that to myself, right? So, yeah, I'm Karen Johnston and I'm from Delaware.
Awesome. Harry, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hey, what's up, everybody? I'm Harry. I live in New Jersey. I'm currently sitting in a hotel room in Boston.
Cool. Tara, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Tara. I'm in Telluride, Colorado.
Awesome. How about Leslie E? Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Leslie. I'm in Southwest Iowa.
Cool. And let's see. We'll go. How about Marissa?
Marissa gives you a thumbs up. She's sitting next to Coach Blue here.
Okay, that's right. You get the massive feedback. You'll get the massive feedback.
She gave me the eye, Chris.
How about this guy, JT Frank? Never heard of him.
Hey guys, this is JT. I'm calling in from Delaware, and I just want to say how much I appreciate everybody jumping on here tonight. I'm looking forward to this one.
Awesome. And then I'm Chris Norris. I'm in Chiang Rai, Thailand, and I just want to introduce the presenter, who is Blue Robinson. So Blue, and if I screw this up, please forgive me, is in Utah, and Blue is a substance use disorder counselor and also a clinical mental health counselor. He's been a titan in the industry, as he likes to say, of others, for about 20 years. And he is the founder of Addict to Athlete, and he works closely with his wife Marissa, and they've been crushing it now for quite some time. We really like what they have going on, and really appreciative of you coming on board and presenting with us today, Blue. So please take it away.
Yeah,
Oops.
no, Chris, that was perfect. Thank you. Titan, I've never said that, but that sounds good, right? I like that. That's pretty awesome. I feel that same way talking to you, brother. So thank you, everybody, for being here. What a cool thing to hear so many points of view and from all parts of the country here. This is I don't know, a really challenging thing to try and condense what we do here on Team Addict to Athlete in a short amount of time. But I wanted to talk more also about just the approach that we took when creating another pathway to help people overcome addiction. And Addict to Athlete, now we've been established, we're going on 11 years this Saturday. It's our 11-year anniversary. And Addict to Athlete started just with me having an idea of wanting to go running at lunchtime. And I thought, well, if I could squeeze another client in there, then we can go running with a client. Maybe we'll get the run in, but we'll also maybe make some change. And that little idea kind of snowballed into this new path of recovery using physical agility and team building and what I call the erase and replace philosophy. That's actually made a lot of, headway in just other forms and other paths to recovery. So I look forward to sharing a little bit about what I've seen with a little bit more hands-on type recovery process than just some of the traditional methods that we've used over the years. My wife, Marissa, who's over here, she's a recreational therapist. And so when I presented this idea to her, I kind of stole a lot of her ideas to put it into Addict to Athlete, which is, something that I like to do, but I give her credit for. But it does work. And I'm still kind of shocked that it does because it kind of goes against the grain to a lot of tradition. But what I've noticed over the years significantly is what paths we can take are so individualized that I'm kind of against the cookie cutter lifestyle. I want to make sure that everyone I come in contact with knows that even my path to help them on that path of recovery and healing isn't the only one. And so I'll share a little bit about what the program is and just kind of what I've noticed about addiction over the past 20 years since I've been doing the counseling and therapy. So Chris, am I in control of this now or is it still you, brother? Awesome. Okay. So at the core of addiction, there's some interesting dynamics that I found. It's kind of a funny thing. I've noticed that there's a core issue that all of us have, and it gets picked up early in life, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a little while. But what I've noticed is that there's something that we pick up along the way of our journey through life. A lot of times it starts, something kind of small. Maybe it's something that doesn't feel quite right, or maybe something that's happened to us, maybe some traumatic experience, or maybe something that's happened to us that we've been convinced is normal. That core then kind of falls into this precursor of all these ideas and these thoughts that we have. And these core issues turn into these false beliefs that I believe cause the feelings that we try to suppress with addiction. And I'll get it more into that, Chris, as you go to the next slide, as we get into a little bit more about what I've noticed. So we know that addiction is a complex condition. It's a brain disease, and it manifests in compulsive substance use and harmful issues despite the negative consequences. But in 20 years, I've noticed something that I would say patterns a lot of these things into one foundation. And there's two reasons. Chris, you can go to the next one. We'll just jump ahead, brother. There's two reasons I've noticed that people use. The first one I've noticed is that people can have an experience. So you say you're in your teenage years, you have an experience, you go to a party, someone's drinking, you have the experience, you try it, it's great, maybe college years, fantastic, but then you can put it down and move on with life. Maybe it becomes something you do on the weekends, maybe it does something on the holidays, but you can move away from it. But more often than not, the people that end up having addictive issues, the dependents, they find that substance fills a void that they've established. And the funny thing about this is I've noticed these patterns in the 20 years I've been doing this, and you can learn a lot from people's addiction by simply observing what substances they use. We know that a lot of these kind of behaviors are a subset for self-medicating. And what I noticed is that if I found people that were smoking marijuana or drinking, chances are they had a good dose of depression. If someone was using opiates, something hurt, something physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, they were in some kind of pain. If someone was using, benzodiazepines or Xanax, those kind of pills, right? I found that those people don't want to feel good. They don't want to feel bad. They want to feel nothing. Those are the ones I found have come from significant trauma. And each substance that I found that my clients were using, if we peeled back the layers a little bit, I started realizing that there's a pathway to lead to the why they started using in the first place. Okay, Chris, next one. Now, the coolest thing about what I discovered is that on average, I found, I worked with youth for quite a while and I worked with adults primarily, but what I noticed is that there's about a 2-year buffer that an individual will do, like especially if you're a teenager, about 2 years between the first time you start using before your life becomes unmanageable and people start to notice. Now, sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less. But the crazy thing about that is you rewind the tape on that 2-year buffer and you can find even the source of what caused some of this chaos and some of this, I guess, these problems that create the addiction. And the substance of choice, like I said, can lead us to that core issue. So one thing I really do with my own athletes, and I call all my clients athletes because I don't call them addicts. It's not something that I label them with. I don't think labeling them with a negative connotation is going to help them. So we don't use that in our program. But what I notice is that you start peeling back the layers, we can find the source of what causes this. So for instance, and we'll get into this in a minute, if one of my clients started using at age 14, I want to rewind the tape and find out what happened to them at like age 12. Now, this is kind of funny because what they start doing is you start peeling back the layers, and on average, you'll find some kind of activating event, something that didn't feel right, didn't quite, put them in a place where they felt they could have independent thought or choice, or maybe they felt they were out of control, or maybe it was a traumatic experience. And once we do that, as you'll see here in a minute, we can start pinpointing on how to correct it, which is kind of a cool thing. Okay, Chris. So I use the Erik Erikson stage of development quite a bit in my practice. And this is why I think this is so crucial for us to teach some of these things that we learned in grad school that you never think you're going to use. But I think Erik Erikson's stages of development, they work so well with addiction and addiction recovery because, like I said, you can pinpoint where this stuff starts happening. Now, granted, the first level there, trust versus mistrust, it is interesting to me that that's the very first thing we learn as human beings is how to trust someone, or we establish a feeling of mistrust. And I remember watching a video I think it was like infants who had been orphaned in Romania. And in this video, they had like 15 or 16, 20 like infants, like babies, all kind of in this big room. And there was one nurse that would pick the baby up, change the diaper, feed the baby, put it back down, wrap it up, and then she'd go to the next one. And the thing that I noticed is that it was absolutely quiet in there. It wasn't what I thought it would be with, some fussy kids and stuff, because what I realized is that lady would take care of them, but those kids knew that no matter how much they cried, no matter how much they fought, that they themselves have developed a mistrust to their own internal like being. If they're uncomfortable and they'd cry, they would stop because no one would come and render assistance. And so what I noticed is that there's a lot of trauma that happens that we carry with us. And so this trust versus mistrust, I think, is kind of interesting. I've worked with clients, as many of you might have too, who say, I don't trust anybody. You start rewinding the tape, you can find some of the source code to this. The autonomy versus shame, that's an interesting one, right? It's about when kids start getting ready to walk. They start kind of doing things because they feel driven to do it. So, it's like the little baby, the little infant toddler who's starting to shoot the gap between the coffee table and the couch. They're being autonomous now. They're starting to move on their own. If that's inhibited, if that's kind of taken away from them, they develop that shame. Like I have this internal feeling of I want to be over there, but every time I try to move, this dad figure or this mother figure comes and takes me away and puts me in this crib. This is why adolescents and children who have primary caregivers who are in addiction Maybe they're in the bathroom, so they put the baby in the playpen or in the crib. This is why it can be devastating to them, because they have such a small world to try and navigate in now. And they don't realize or articulate that it's because mom and dad are doing something shady. They look at it as, it must be me, because every time I try to explore or move around, I get put here. So next one, 3 to 6, initiative versus guilt. So now, instead of that autonomy where they're driving themselves because they have this inner feeling, now they're doing it with purpose. And this is where you come downstairs in the morning and your kids, pouring them a bowl of cereal, and they're pouring the milk out, and it's going all over the table, onto the floor and stuff, right? They're taking initiative to start doing something. And this is where you really start seeing the success by 6 mentality. And that is, if these kids can form a sense of trust, autonomy, and initiative by the time they're 6, chances are they're going to have an okay adolescence and adulthood. If not, we're going to have some delays in behavior, maybe some self-worth issues. If they've experienced trauma, for sure, they're going to have some issues as they get older. Because this industry versus inferiority is about the window where the bad stuff happens to these people. The bad stuff kind of happens between this stage, because now you're starting to understand your world a little bit. This industry is like you're part of a family, you're part of a school class, you're part of a church group, whatever, you're part of something. If not, then you have that feeling of being inferior. So me, I moved all the time when I was young. My mother would move us around when rent was due. So there were times we didn't unpack boxes by the time we had to move. So I never had a sense of industry. I never had a sense of family. My mother was married at age 14, started having kids very young. She was a kid having kids. And so this industry I had was kind of a bankrupt system. So I felt very inferior, very withdrawn, very like cautious of anybody, because I could never build relationships, because every time we did, we bounced and we left, which put this cycle here into a huge kind of a complex issue, industry versus inferiority. This is where we start getting into those, like, do I belong to this family? I have a different dad than the rest of my family, or do I feel inferior, which is going to cause this teenage year to be completely out of whack. The identity versus role confusion years. And not only are you going through puberty and all the hormone changes, but this is where you start waking up and think, do I believe the same things my parents did? If you don't, and I don't know how many teenagers have a strong sense of identity, but I don't think it has to be you're leading up to be the valedictorian of your high school or the prom king or queen, whatever. This is just, who you are, the rhythm that your life is taking you, or you're stuck in the role confused mindset. This is where we start seeing substance use and addiction take hold. Between ages 12 to 19 is that golden window to where we start exploring these substances. We start kind of, filling out what's going to work for us. And this can make or break you in adulthood. Now, the sad thing is if you don't have that strong sense of identity, by the time you hit 20 to 40, you start getting into this intimacy versus isolation stage. And these are the clients I work with now. A lot of my athletes fall into that age category. And they said, well, coach, I'm very happily married. I'm like, yeah, but when's the last time you had a conversation with your wife that wasn't, stuck in small talk? They're like, oh yeah. See, intimacy isn't just about sex. It's about emotional intimacy. It's about being able to have comfortable silence, to be able to be in rhythm with the person that you chose to spend your life with. Now, if that's not observed and you don't have that, and you find yourself isolating, even though you're surrounded by family and people, you're going to grow stagnant in life. What a sad word stagnant is, like stagnation, versus being able to generate a life worth of education, of employment, of career. Because at the very end, you can look back at it and have a sense of integrity. I did something with the time I had here on this little ball of mud called Earth. Or you look back at it as maybe the hokey pokey is what it was all about. And that would kind of suck. So here's the cool part about this, you guys, I want to show you, is that whenever I have a client come in and they sit down and they go over some of the biopsychosocial, some of the history stuff, I always ask them, what was the first time you ever used anything? And they'll say, well, I was 10 years old, or I was the youngest one I had was 10, but maybe they'll say like I was 13. I'll say, I want to rewind the tape 2 years. Because remember, on average, I found that people use something 2 years after an activating event, something that sucked, something that hurt, something that didn't feel good. When you rewind the tape, you're like, okay, what was life going on? When at age 11, they're like, that's the industry versus inferiority stage. And they start saying, well, we made a huge move. We moved from California to Utah. It was this culture shock. I didn't think it was that big of a deal, but dad was always busy. He wasn't home a lot. Like mom was kind of on edge because she was in a new environment. But you know what? That's not a big deal, right? So I shouldn't be upset. Well, yeah, it is, because your industry that you were a part of got taken away from you. And now you're trying to find another identity here in Utah, which is kind of a cultural shock to the system. And so what I found was that when I started to go back and find where people kind of got off the rails a little bit, all we needed to do was increase those areas. That's one reason why Addict to Athlete works so well, is because now you're part of a team. You're not just part of a recovery group, you're part of a team. This industry that we're creating for you, it's not just to teach you how to go run and get these awesome race medals and all this kind of stuff. It's about building a sober support system in active recovery. It's about not being ashamed of the word addiction or addict. It's about erasing and replacing it with something of greater value. So now they become part of this industry, this team. They no longer feel inferior, which is going to put them into that identity. I'm no longer an addict. Now I'm an athlete, which then puts them in this position to start having emotionally intimate relationships because they start feeling secure with themselves. And the cool thing about this is, even though maybe on average 2 years, we can even go back further and say, yeah, the initiative versus guilt. There's a lot of things, that I felt with my family, and it all kind of channeled onto me. Like I was the oldest in my family. And so I felt like I had to step up when my mom was gone and my dad was working all the time, or a single parent home. The cool thing about Erik Erikson stages is you take your client or yourself into this concept. You're like, why do I have a hard time like following through with things? I don't take initiative enough. Well, maybe you start going back to this autonomy. Do you feel comfortable doing things alone? Do you always apologize for things that you are or should be a part of? Like, oh, I feel like it's my fault because the things didn't work out the way they should have. I love the Erik Erikson stage because once you start getting tangible, like things that your clients can kind of sink their teeth into, they can themselves pull themselves out of the rut. So that's why I like calling myself a coach more than a therapist, because if I can coach them into seeing, this is the small like leverage changes and small kind of changes they can make, they start seeing the bigger side effects of that and the positive consequences down the road. So that's why I use this so much, because once they see a little bit of a blueprint for how to change, it's not as overwhelming for them. They're like, okay, I need to get into an industry. I got to be part of this. I'm going to join this. I'm going to start doing that. I'm going to go back to school. And then it starts getting on that positive side. Okay, Chris, next one. The cool part about this next slide, it looks like a crazy thing, but I want to share with you guys what I do. So as a therapist and counselor, what I don't like doing is trying to convince people that they're broken. I'd rather have them do this in a matter that's going to put them in control of where they're headed. And I found that this works really well. This is called the awareness cycle. All of us have a story. And that core issue I was talking about is that white dot right in the middle. Something was heavy, something hurt. That's your core issue. And the cool part about this is once you yourself identify your core issue, if you follow these steps, you can eliminate it. You can absolutely crush it, and it can no longer hold you down. So I'll show you, and with getting a little personal, I'll share with you what my core issue was. Growing up with a mother, again, who was married at 14 years old, having kids as a kid, she put us through hell. She really did. And she did the best she could, but it wasn't that great. And she put us in situations where she's been married and divorced 7 times. So I had this really bad taste in my mouth for stepfathers, some of which I still hold scars on my body because of the physical abuse they put me through. So my story I created was one of poverty and one of despair and one of sadness and pain and anger. And what happened was I got this core issue of feeling neglected. So my core issue, not knowing growing up, was neglect. I had love at home, so I thought, but it was channeled really weird. Like it was, my mom would say to us, "Hey, I love you guys." And then she'd leave for a week. We wouldn't know where she was. And then she'd come back with this new boyfriend in tow. And we'd be like, okay, well, love to me sounds like a little bit of sadness and anger and pain, because every time my mom says that, we go without. And so my story revolved around that substance use, bouncing around from schools, all kinds of like negative effects from moving so much with schools and bad grades and dropping out of high school. And what happened was that core issue of neglect created thoughts in me. Now, here's what I like to do with my clients. I'm a therapist that doesn't like talking about feelings because I kind of think feelings are overrated. And I'll tell you why. We live in a world now where everyone feels, very few think. And I know that sounds kind of harsh, but what I mean by this is, if I was to say Chris, if I was to say, you know what, I think the president of the United States, I feel the president of the United States is doing a horrible job. Well, if Chris thought the president was doing a great job, he'd say, well, I feel like he's doing a good job. But we couldn't debate that because it's a feeling. It's my truth. So I say like, well, I feel like we should, do this, or I feel like we should talk about that. Well, feelings, when they're discussed like that, are non-debatable. We can't discuss them because they're your truth. But if I said, Chris, I think the president's doing a fantastic job, and Chris doesn't think so. If I think so, Chris and I can get into a debate, but we don't like that. We don't like the fight or the consequence that's going to come from trying to hold my opinions, to a point where we're able to have the long discussions. I want to be right all the time. So I'll use feelings instead of thoughts. So as a therapist, very rarely will I ever say, how does that make you feel? What I want to know is, why do you think that? Help me understand your thoughts behind that. Because my thoughts of what I felt neglect was created the feelings that made me want to hide from it by using, which then suppressed it with all my addiction. So this is the crazy thing. Everyone has a story, and your stories are sometimes intense. Sometimes they're full of trauma. Sometimes they're full of misunderstandings, but everyone has a story. Our thoughts that we kind of think about the core issue, so mine being neglect, I thought neglect meant that it's my fault. I'm doing something wrong. I thought that no one else could really love me. I thought that this is the way that life is. You got to fight for everything. I thought that when someone said they cared about me, they were just lying. So all of these thoughts that created in my life, the feelings of sadness, depression, anger, frustration, all these feelings I needed to get rid of. And I found that alcohol, smoking marijuana, dropping acid, I felt like all that stuff took away every bit of that issue. So I had to literally go back and change my thinking before I could understand my feelings. So this is what I walk my clients through. I have them grab their core issue. And the cool thing about this is, if it's not their core issue, say they pick something else, you won't be able to complete this full circle. So they'll get bogged down by the wants or maybe the actions. They won't be able to finish the whole thing. So I'll walk you through what this looks like. The story is yours and only yours. Your thoughts are the hardest thing to do because we feel about our addiction. We very rarely think about addiction. But if you want to change your world, you've got to change your thinking. So most of my clients, myself included, get bogged down on this because it's hard to get out of that feeling mentality. Once we've established the thoughts, like it's my fault because I need too much, or I thought that, everyone's family system was like this. And these are the feelings that, the sadness, the depression, the pain, the anger. Now I go over here to the wants. What do I want as a result of now knowing that my core issue is neglect? What do I want for myself? This is something that when you ask people in addiction, they have a hard time answering. It's easy to answer the stakeholders and the others what they want. But when you ask yourself, what do you want? It's kind of hard. So what did Blue Robinson want as it pertains to neglect for myself? I wanted to be seen. I wanted to be loved. I wanted to be present in my own life. That's what I wanted for myself. The others are the people who are very close to you. These are your spouse, maybe family members, people that are very close to you. What do you want from them? And for me, in neglect, as it pertains to neglect, I wanted for them to know and to feel how much I loved them and how much I have to offer. So for them, I wanted them to know who I am authentically. The stakeholders in my life, those are the people like you guys, like Chris and everybody else out here. You are the stakeholders in my life now because we've met here today. What do I want for you? As it pertains to my neglect, I want to teach you. I want to help you open your mind to a different approach. I want to share with you what I've learned so that you can say, hey, I know this guy, or I've heard this story that, fill in the blank. So those are the things I wanted as it pertains to my situation of neglect. Once I've identified those things now, I go over to the action. And this is the hard part because I believe that action-oriented recovery is the way it's done. In the past, I hid from it. I suppressed it. I lied, I cheated, I stole, I got high. Now, what was I doing then? Like now, what am I doing now? Well, now I'm learning about myself. I'm opening up myself to new experiences. I'm opening up to people that I never thought, possible that they would love to hear from me. I was so open that right now I like where this is going. But here's the hard part. What's coming next? The next is the hardest part of this whole story, because what am I going to do now to eliminate neglect from my life? This has to be something tangible, something physical. You have to do something, and you have to know when's the now. It's got to have a date and time. I can't say to myself, well, I'm just going to take it one day at a time. That's not going to work for me because it has to be tangible. So for me, when it was pertaining to neglect, I said, I need to go to the person that's neglected me the most and share with them what that meant. And you guys, I'll tell you, it was one of the hardest things I had to do. I wrote a letter to my mother because every time I tried to talk to her on the phone, she would neglect me by hanging up. And there was a peak experience I had where this happened. And the last thing she said in this argument we were having was, I never want to talk to you again. And I said, you be very careful with that because I'll honor that. And she hung up on me. So I'm like, here comes my next. So what I did is I wrote this very detailed letter expressing everything that's happened to me from the moment I started understanding how crazy and chaotic our life was, all the way through describing the scars that were given to me by people that she brought into our life. And it wasn't a, how dare you, it was, I need you to understand where I'm coming from and I deserve to be heard. And I sent that letter. It took like 5 stamps to send. It was so big. And I remember dropping it in the mailbox thinking, this is going to change everything. And I didn't hear from her for 7 years. So I know she read the letter, but the ball was now in her court. I gave it back to her. And the coolest thing that happened is that I'm like, I'm no longer just going to sit in silence and be neglected by the people that are supposed to love me. Now I'm going to have a voice. Because when I dropped that letter in there, it felt so empowering because all of a sudden I started going backwards. Now listen to this. So now I go down here to wants. Wants, I want people to know how much I love. I got married. I had kids. I had 3 kids before my mother even realized I was married, right? The others in my life, these are my wife, Marissa. She could start seeing these changes that I'm making and how attentive as a husband and as a father I am. My stakeholders, my friends, my family, the clients I work with, they know that I'm genuine. And they come to me now because they're like, hey, you've been through this, you understand this. So I can't be neglected anymore. In fact, I have to kind of hide from people sometimes now because people are giving me so much attention. The feelings completely shifted. Once I realized what this was, I was no longer sad. I was no longer mad. I let it go. I forgave people that harmed me. I let all that stuff go. It changed the way I thought. This isn't my fault. This is her not understanding what being a mother truly was. She missed out on a lot of things, and that's pretty sad for her. These thoughts changed, which means it added to my story. And once that core issue was discovered and eliminated, and I was no longer like having the core issue of neglect, guess what happened? Another one popped in. And I'm like, yeah, I thought I did one and done. But the cool part about this is I took that same thing. Now I'm looking at abandonment, right? So I plug abandonment in there. I go through the cycle. I take that all the way to that next step, that physical thing I'm going to do to eliminate it. And the same thing happened. All life started to change. And then guess what happened? Boom, another one plugged in, self-esteem. I did it again. And what happens, it becomes so easy now and so like just systematic that when something comes in that doesn't feel right, I can throw it into this little diagram and do something physical or tangible, and I can erase and replace it. So this is what I've loved to work with my clients on, because this is like, once you identify where that core issue comes from by the Eric Erickson stage, plug it into this system, you can get down to what's really causing it. But the coolest thing I found with Addict to Athlete that blew me away was this next slide. Chris, go ahead. This is where I started realizing what it really meant to establish balance. Now, balance in recovery is huge. There's a lot of components to it. I like the biopsychosocial model, because the bio model is your diet, your sleep, and your exercise. You have to move. We are physical beings. We cannot just sit and hope to heal. We've got to move. The psych parts, the mental health, we've got to keep our mental health going. Social relationships, we're social beings. And that spiritual component, connection to something bigger. Next slide, Chris. This is where I found where it worked for me. The very first time I went on a run with a few of my clients, we started running, and we're running and we're doing great. And I'm saying, hey guys, we're going to start this new group. We're going to call it Addict to Athlete. And we're running, and I'd had them come in a little bit early for group. We'd stretch out, we'd go over a few things, and we'd go out and run. And what I noticed is about 10 minutes into our run, they'd start opening up to me. They'd start talking about trauma. They'd start talking about things that had happened, and they start being really open. And I'm like, where's this coming from? I remember asking one of my clients once, why are you telling me so much of your life out here in public, when in my office, which is feng shui office with lights and running water and like that background that Chris is at right now, I'm like, you guys are tight as crud. You don't say anything, but we're out here and you're telling me all of your stuff. And they're like, I don't know. I just feel like I want to get it off my chest. What I didn't realize is that running stimulates the left, right side of your brain, which is what EMDR therapy is. For any of you that don't know what EMDR therapy is, it's a model that therapists use to help people process trauma by stimulating both left and right sides of the brain to help process all the trauma and all the crazy stuff from the frontal lobe into long-term memory, where it's supposed to be. So post-traumatic stress, all this stuff where you've got locked in that frontal lobe, where you're always on the watch, it's draining. Sometimes you have to use drugs and alcohol to calm it down. We're out here running and they start processing this stuff. I'm thinking I'm breaking new ground here, but what I'm really doing is using EMDR without knowing what it was, and it was working, and it's worked ever since. When we're out running and they're pounding the pavement or they're trail running and stuff, I'll now use this because I've been trained and certified in EMDR therapy. I'll use this to let them actually let go of their trauma as we're running. And we'll move from that negative mindset into the positive mindset, and they'll let it go. They'll heal through movement. You see the endorphins that are released, or they process trauma. You start training them for things they never thought possible. The very first time I had my athletes line up for a race, it was, again, 11 years ago this Saturday, we did this. They lined up for the Chase the Mayor 5K here in Provo, Utah. It was a gimmick race where these guys would give I think the mayor of Utah, of Provo, a 2-minute head start, and then you chase the mayor, slap him on the rear end as you walk by, as you run by. Like, great job, mayor. I don't know what that was about, but I remember 5 athletes showed up, 4 guys and 1 girl. And right before they started, they handed out these shirts, Addict to Athlete. And I'm like, are you guys sure you want to wear those? Because I've been told and I've been taught and I've been instructed that you're going to break your anonymity. And they're like, we don't care. We feel so good. We want people to know what we're doing. I'm like, okay. They put the shirts on. They started running. All but one of them caught the mayor. And as they caught the mayor, and the mayor of Provo says, hey, Addict Athlete, what's this about? All of a sudden, there's an ex-heroin addict named Tyson who's now having a conversation about addiction recovery to the mayor of Provo. It's one of the bigger cities here in Utah. And I'm thinking the mayor's probably upset that a former heroin addict's beating him in a race. And caught him by 2 minutes. But all the 3 other athletes caught him and had the discussion about what their addiction recovery process looked like. They were walking embassies of sobriety, of recovery. Well, they all finished the race, and I was excited for them. I thought, well, that was kind of a cool thing. The mayor contacted the county commissioners, which were ultimately my bosses. I got called into my boss's office thinking I'm going to get fired because I let these guys do this. But the government and the powers that be said, we love this process, keep it going. Now, 11 years later, we have chapters all over. Coach Butson down here, she's a coach in Telluride for Addict Athlete. We're growing exponentially because what we're finding is that the team approach, the erase and replace philosophy, the turning the mess of addiction into the message of sobriety, it's working. And we're firm believers that you don't have to hide anymore. You can actually become one of a superhero type mindset by sharing with people the things you've overcome. Because to me, it's one of the most amazing things. But I gave up a long time ago trying to convince people to be clean. And I wanted to help guide them into seeing that there are solutions to these. We gotta turn over some of these rocks that are kind of heavy and deep. We got to expose them and remove them from your life so that you don't have that emotional weight, that emotional stuff holding you back anymore. When we first started this, we got kind of blasted by a lot of groups and a lot of people. Some traditional meetings didn't like what we were doing because we were breaking a lot of the traditions that they had established here. But once they realized that we weren't trying to erase their spots in the process, they started to embrace us. And I love that so much because it really has shown what we're really capable of. We can do really hard things, and people that would be qualified as addicts, they can become the most amazing people because they get things done. And when you flip the script from all the negative stuff they were a part of, and you flip the script and you give them the same tools with just a little bit of a different approach, there's nothing they can't do. I'm constantly inspired by the people that society once kind of threw away because they now are the champions. The very first, I'll leave you with this and we'll get on to the next section, but I'll leave you with this. One of my athletes, his name was Brandon Black. And Coach Blue's kind of a ball baby here, so bear with me, you guys. Brandon was one of my I had the first, original athletes, and then I had Brandon. He was number 6. And we were up at a 5K in Salt Lake City, and it was a big 5K. And I was waiting there at the starting line. So they all take off, and I'm excited. I run over to the finish line. And about 25 minutes later, I see Brandon pop around the corner and start running for the finish line. And I'm like, this is great. This is our 3rd race as a team, and one of my athletes is going to win. And I'm cheering and I'm excited. And there's everybody else that's kind of watching these finishers come in. But then I see Brandon about 200 yards away from the finish, slow down, stop, and start messing with his shoe. And I'm like, what are you doing? I'm like screaming. He can't hear me. He's 200 yards away. And all of a sudden I see another guy pop around the corner and he runs past Brandon. And then another person. So now Brandon's in 2nd. Now he's in 3rd. And then he gets up and another person pops around and passes him. Now he's 4th. And he finishes. And I'm like, Brandon, what the heck, dude? Are you okay? Are you hurt? And he said, no, I'm fine. I'm like, what were you doing? And he's like, you saw that? I'm like, yeah, man, we all saw that. What happened? He said, I didn't want to win. And I said, why, man? He said, because no one would believe me, Blue. I'm an addict. They'll all think I cheated. I'm like, did you? He's like, I don't think so. I hit every turn we were supposed to. And then it hit me. Brandon's never been in a position in his life to win. He's always been pushed down. He's always been set aside. He's always been called an addict. He's always been given all the bad stuff because of him trying to suppress the trauma that he experienced. And I said to him, if you ever do that again, I'm going to run out there and pull you in by your ears, man. I'm like, you deserve that win. Don't ever do that again. Don't ever sacrifice a victory because you're afraid of what someone else is going to think. I saw you. I knew you were first. So in my book, you won, but don't ever do that again. I wish I could sit here and tell you that Brandon took that to heart, but he didn't. And years later, about 3 or 4 years later, I saw him as I was running a very exclusive 5K at the Utah State Prison. Utah State Prison adopted Addict to Athletes philosophy. They opened up their own chapter within the prison itself. I ran a 5K with those inmates several years ago. It was one of the most exclusive 5Ks you've ever been to. And it was like 30 laps around the inside of their fenced zone there. But I saw Brandon there. And I'm like, so this is where you've been hiding. Brandon had a relapse, got himself in some trouble, got sent to prison for some burglary and some assault charges. And he told me, Coach, as soon as I'm done, I'm coming. And the next time I saw Brandon was at his funeral where he had overdosed. See, Brandon still kept to play small. He kept playing small. He never would allow himself to come out forward. And I kind of promised myself then that we'd go a little bit extra for those athletes that feel that way. Now we have several that have passed. In fact, we just lost one last week, and that was a heartbreaking experience too, because addict athlete isn't the solution to everyone's troubles. I mean, addiction's still very real. But what I've noticed is that the team approach makes the difference. That when they're on a team, it's not just me as the coach of Team Addict Athlete, it's all of the captains, it's all of the athletes, it's all the participants that we need to kind of lean into and help these guys overcome this stuff. We can't expect to do it ourselves. And I've noticed that when they start withdrawing and pulling away and start feeling again alone, that's when the bad stuff happens. So we're doing a lot now to retrain some of our coaches and some of our folks to say, check into the back of the pack, make sure that everyone's still moving forward. I could tell you 1,000,001 success stories as much as I can tell you the ones that hurt. But what I want to leave you with is that no one's too far gone. Sometimes the out of the box approach is what needs to happen. I'm a firm believer that we can convince people that they're okay by making them feel good and giving them pats on the back, or we can get down to the rough and rugged and raw stuff, and it may hurt a little bit, but each time they come in and it hurts a little bit because they're doing that emotional work, that wound heals. And they come back and we clean it up and we rebandage it, and it heals a little bit more. And pretty soon they'll have a scar, but the scar won't hurt anymore. And when they look at that scar, they'll think, okay, I remember when I got that hurt, but it's not going to hurt anymore. And they'll go along their business and they'll forget about it until they look at it again. That's kind of what I see recovery as, is a wound that takes a little bit of time to heal, but once it does, it doesn't continue to hurt. It can be left in the past as a reminder of where you've been, not so much where you're going. Chris.
Awesome, man. So good, Blue. I really appreciate you coming on. I'm going to leave your contact information slide up here for a little bit, and then we're going to stop the recording and we can have a discussion. And if you're watching the recording, you're like, man, I wish I could have been part of that discussion. Well, then you got to come to the meetings.
There you go.
Awesome, man. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.